This is Auteur Detour, wherein three film lovers travel through the filmographies of cinema's most important directors in hopes of finding a greater understanding on the other side.
Hi, welcome to Auteur Detour. This is our final episode on the Coen Brothers. We're going to be talking about their most recent film, The Ballad of Buster Scruggs, and then kind of transitioning into an overview on kind of our final thoughts after watching all the movies, ingesting all the themes. What are our conclusions? I'm here with my co-hosts, Ian Hinckley.
Hi.
And Chris Palazza.
Howdy, y'all.
This is your last chance, guys. Make it stupid.
Meow.
All right. I shouldn't have encouraged
Pants
that.
shot.
Okay. So in 2018, after the Coens' aesthetically questionable and thematically muddled Hail Caesar, the Coens changed tack altogether by shooting their first anthology film digitally for the first time to be released directly onto a streaming service, Netflix. The conceit behind the film is that we're watching adaptations of Western short stories, the kind you might find in an old book in a used book section. And indeed, two of the sequences are based on just that kind of short story. The stories are the titular Ballad of Buster Scruggs, wherein a singing cowboy who wouldn't be at a place like in the original True Grit rides his horse into a small town and exacts terrible violence on basically everyone he encounters. The second part, Near Algodones, or am I mispronouncing that? Algodones.
Yeah, that's your
basically a young kind of outlaw bank robber gets immediately kind of thwarted by an eccentric bank teller and is basically harangued by the law kind of multiple times until he finally meets his end. Part 3, Meal Ticket, just a tragedy about a young man born to, terrible disfigurement, disabled, and basically at the mercy of the universe and his caretaker, played by Liam Neeson. We'll get into that. Part 4, All Gold Canyon, which is just about an old prospector who's meticulously searching for gold. Finally comes upon what may be his, greatest find, only to have it kind of taken away from him by a violent young person. Part 5, The Gal Who Got Rattled. A young woman is on a journey on the Oregon Trail, but kind of has multiple episodes of bad fortune along the way. And finally, Part 6, The Mortal Remains, about 3 kind of very different people riding a stagecoach with 2 strange British, how would you describe them? Eccentric British,
biblical
men. They're like
sort of
fancy men. Like
yeah.
We'll get into this. We'll get into all of this. I don't know if this is even helpful, but just wanted to give a basic overview of these plots. So when we get into the stories, you'll have some kind of footing. But if you haven't seen this movie, please go see it. It is such a beautiful wonder. I love this movie. I think it's one of the Coens' best. When I feverishly when I try to like frantically make my top list at the very end, we'll see where it ends up. But because I always forget to do that. But I thought it was fantastic. What did you guys think? And also, what's your favorite episode? Give me a ranking right first? Now. Top 3.
Because I also love this movie. I already know because I'm always such a fucking reader of people's eye movements during these intro sections that Chris does not love this movie, I'm guessing, but I fucking love this movie so much. I think that for me, it's just, it's the Coen Brothers indulging in this thing that they have where they get this sort of image in their head, and then they usually often will weave a movie sort of around that image. I've kind of thought in some of their movies that's where it comes from. It's like the diorama filmmaking that they do sometimes. Absolutely. And this was like the perfect sort of medium for that, because it's short films and they don't have to put as much work into crafting a structure or anything like that, but they still did an amazing job with that. I'm not going to say that they didn't, but I just mean you know, they could just sort of build these moments and then like flesh them out, you know?
If I may interject, they really,
Yeah.
I mean, they really, a couple of those episodes are like almost, I wouldn't call them like tone poems, but like they really are just like, here's the mood. The plot is less like a you know, a narrative kind of like up and down than it is like 2 points with a line. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
Just like,
and it
here's the
did
vibe,
make me,
here it is, and then like
I'm sure that you,
just
Travis,
nail
have
it.
like a love for this already since you work in this medium, but like it gave me this new sort of fascination or love for like just short film, you know? Because that's
Yes.
what this is really. It's
Totally.
like 6 short films, and like the way that short films are structured and how they aren't bound to this sort of like 3-act structure that all narrative movies fall into almost, you know?
Yes.
It made me just kind of love it in a new way, you know? Not like I didn't ever before, but it was like, oh, watching like masters work in short film was really amazing to me. I don't know.
Yes.
Yeah, you know,
And the answer to the best, my favorite, sorry, Chris,
No, of course.
is actually, I'm not going to answer that because there's ones I love for different reasons. I think that the Tim Blake Nelson Buster Scruggs titular one is so fun and so Coensy and like classic Coensy, like just
But over the top and cartoonish to a degree that they've never been before. I mean, I think they take it to like new heights.
like, I think that that's
yeah.
so fun. But I also
Tour de
find
force.
the Zoe Kazan,
Yes.
you know, that one just so heartbreaking and beautifully made, and I just fell in love with
That's
it.
my
Like, those
favorite.
two
That's my
kind of
favorite.
tie for me.
Me too.
Oh,
Chris.
so interesting. Yeah, so I grew up loving short stories and loving anthologies. Like that was my thing as a kid. I read a lot and I loved, you know, kind of cheesy stuff like Stephen King's like Skeleton Crew and like different seasons. Clive Barker's, he's written a number of like different anthology books and stuff, right? So
Clive Barker
really-
is in the running for my pick for next director for this series, by the
What?
way. Like, forget David Fincher, forget Paul Thomas Anderson, Clive Barker. Anyway,
Dude,
go ahead.
I hadn't
Sorry.
even considered that guy. Anyway,
the best.
Yeah. Hey, wow. All right. Anyway, I loved anthologies. So honestly, when I first saw this movie, I had no idea what I literally put movies on completely blindly. So I'm like, wow, this is awesome. And it starts off with Buster Scruggs. I'm like, this is wacky as fuck. This is great, you know? And then the tones kind of, oh, it's a different story. I am literally 50-50 on the stories. I love 3 of them. And I don't hate the other 3, but their other, like, Meal Ticket is just so hard for me to watch. It's
It's hard.
so
It's
hard to watch. The tone,
I'm
it
with
just
you.
goes so
That's
cold,
the
you
one I
know?
might want to talk about the most,
It's
though. But
so
yeah,
hard to watch.
I'm 100%.
Gal Who
with you.
Got Rattled is good. I really love Zoe Kazan. She's always great and stuff. I love the relationships they put in there, but I didn't love the overall story as much as I really love Buster Scruggs, Near Algodonis, and All Gold Canyon. And Mortal Remains left me kind of puzzled, frankly. I still like
Yeah.
kind of scratching my head about that one, but my favorite one to answer your question is All Gold Canyon, probably. Maybe The Ballad of Buster Scruggs,
So
but for
good.
2 very different reasons.
So good.
Tom Waits
Thank
is
you.
the fucking man. I can't believe I didn't
He's
even recognize
so
him the
fucking
first
good.
time I watched it. I'm like, this guy's
Oh,
great.
wow.
Then I'm like, where have I seen this dude
Yeah,
before?
yeah.
It's Tom Waits. So yeah, that probably has my
Yeah.
my fave. Yeah, but overall, a 50-50 movie, given the fact that it's anthology based, a movie I still like overall, but you know, the tones
Okay,
are very
well, I'm
different.
glad to hear that because I will just jump in and say that like the fuck it, I'm just gonna call it the James Franco one. I don't know what
That's
it's
right.
how to say it,
That's
Eider Downs or whatever.
Correct. Yeah.
Is bad to me. Like I don't like that one. Like despite Stephen Root trying his hardest to like save it, which he almost does because he's so funny in it in a weird way. But like, or he's just going for it. And I love Stephen Root.
Yeah.
But like, just it feels like Franco is so miscast as he almost always is. And like,
Is he a good actor though? Like I don't
No.
Like
No.
yeah, so he's like
No.
he's
No, he's a bad
he's
actor.
either well cast or not, I think, rather than like
Yeah,
a good actor or
exactly.
not. And like I think he's fine in this, but yeah, he's not. I wouldn't say he's good. But
I would say
think
that,
there's
like-
there's like several, even within that tiny little short film, there's several amazing ideas and like kind of visual gags that make it worth it to me. I think it's one of the weaker ones as well, but
yeah.
yeah.
I think like, you know, it's kind of weird that like, you know, it's a pretty new movie. What is it? 2018.
2018.
You know, that aside, like it's only, you know, a couple years old, but it seems like the lasting imprint of this movie is like the meme of James Franco saying,
First
hanging,
time.
saying first
First
time,
time, yeah.
which is kind of a bummer, but whatever. Like, because that is like, to me, that's like,
It's great.
that's the joke in the center of that short story. That's the, like when I said it, I think that they sort of craft an image in their head and then like built a little short story around it. Like that was that image in that one,
And maybe this is from another movie. I mean, I think we should actually try to talk about them in order if we can.
I would love to. That's how I wrote my notes, because I was thinking the same thing.
But just to keep it but I just want to say maybe this has been in another movie, but the horse slowly walking away and him trying his best to angle his body
it's
so
definitely
he doesn't
in
die.
other movies,
Yes.
Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and different things.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Yeah.
Yep.
But it's so effective here. When that horse is you see the different tufts of grass that are so, feet apart from each other. And he's going for the next one. It's incredibly effective and tense.
That's actually the image I thought of, because I totally agreed with you when you said this film feels like the Coen Brothers had a central idea, just this idea, and then they craft a story around it. That was the actual image I had, is this image of a horse perpetually going a little bit further, just nibbling slowly at the next thing, and this guy hanging by the noose is just almost at the end of it,
Yeah.
That's just such a great image.
Connecting it to the horse feeding himself and being just oblivious to the fact that he's gonna kill this guy. That's almost like a great Coen Brothers kind of image,
Yeah.
Yep.
Before we go through them all, I do want to say, I thought that it was trying to craft any kind of symmetry that they all have, is that to me that they all in some way or another sort of deal with death in some way. Everybody is sort of facing death in a way, and in one way or another. And I thought that it was interesting how it's 6 different sort of short films, that all sort of some of them are obviously about how impossible it was to live in the Old West. And some of them are just about the cartoonish sort of welcoming of death with a full-on Looney Tunes angel flying away, and but they all deal with it in this sort of way. And I thought that was an interesting sort of framework to tie all 6 of them together.
Well, I think the death thing too, it links in other old movies and stuff. You see these kind of Western kind of attitudes and they just feel kind of be cliche. But in this movie, they really make the point this is the reality that these people had to make for themselves because life was so cheap. And when James Franco's hanging and he sees the girl and he's like, a pretty girl, you know what I mean? That seems like it could be a line in what's his name? Tommy Robbins, death ballad kind of things, I don't know. It just seems like it would be so cliched in any other film. But in this movie, it's they were kind of finding in these Western kind of in this iconography and these kind of archetypal stories, an existential reality that kind of linked it to their other movies that I thought was really cool.
Yeah.
It's
a great
I don't know.
point.
It worked. It was very each episode was so Coen-y to me. Anyway.
Right.
Chris.
No, I was going to say that's actually something I was going to talk about as death as a theme and toward the wrap up. But yeah, that's obviously one that unites them all. And I was thinking this is certainly a commentary on the ever present and inescapable nature of death. It just looms over people in the Old West. It's going to happen. It's just a matter of when and for who, you know what I mean? Even when you think it might be you, maybe you happen to make it out and then, you're just going to die again later, it happens in All Gold Canyon, right? Happens in Near Algodones. The main character dies in the majority of these. So,
Right.
That's right.
Just most.
That's true. Yeah. That's actually.
But it's a topic
really
I'll actually talk about a little bit more, I think, toward the final thoughts. But it definitely is an inescapable theme of this particular movie, and that's very much a Coen theme.
So this first, film within it, The Ballad of Buster Scruggs, is like we said, we don't need to retread, but it's so funny to me. I recommended it as soon as I saw it to Danielle, Greta's mom's mom, so my mother-in-law basically, and forgot that not everybody wants to see fingers exploding off of hands and how extremely violent it is. But
guys shooting
I'd only
themselves in
seen
the
it
face,
once.
repeatedly.
I saw it once when it
That's an amazing shot,
the weekend that it dropped, and I was just oh my god, what a fucking treat. I was so on board with it. And then I remember like 2 days later asking like, did you watch Ballad of Buster Scruggs? And she's like, yeah, we started it, but it was pretty violent right away. Oh, yeah, well, oops.
Welcome to the Coen Brothers.
Yeah,
Exactly.
I've heard. Yeah, I also love that it's like, first of all, like the Ballad of Buster Scruggs, he's like a singing cowboy. This is like kind of indulging in all these super old fashioned, super like kind of.
It really
almost,
felt
again,
like
cliched
Lazy
kind
Old
of
Moon
things,
to me.
but-
Like it felt like they
Right,
weren't like this wasn't them making a play on the Old West. This was them making like their play on like those like their heightened version of like those old movies that they were talking about in fucking Hail Caesar.
But
what
I also
mean?
think
Like,
it's important to remember that like they are directly inspired by literature too, and like the fact that this like they go back to these stories in this book is, I don't think it's just like a framing device. I think they really are calling attention to like this is their inspiration for this. It's like
I think you're right.
getting this vibe directly from the literature rather than kind of like a Hollywood kind of version that you might be more familiar with. But accepting the first
My
one.
dad grew up. He would always talk about when I was a kid. I never read any of these books, but he would always like he was obsessed with like Louis L'Amour cowboy books when he was a kid, which are like the cheap like 50-cent pulp cowboy books, And I know that like this fully brought him back to that. Like this segment, was like it's just that. It's like the cowboy dressed in impeccable white, like impossible white for the Old West. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like
right.
rides into town, and obviously he's not a good guy, but he's so fucking charming that like you can't not love him. Like he's just so, I don't know.
I mean, he's not a
love
bad
his-
guy either. I mean, everyone he kills, they insult him in some way, right? He's not just going around indiscriminately murdering people, but it's also pretty funny how, like you said, he's in all white. He said, how many
Haven't you
people
seen
has he
Terminator
killed?
2, Chris? You can't just go around killing people.
You can in the Old West. That's how we do it. Like
true.
the specter of death looms large in the Old West in a Coen movie. I mean, hey, they all had it coming. I'm sure.
The glee that he has like the whole time, like he's never not smiling, and like even when he gets killed, he's just like, well, that ain't good, and he's not like bummed, it's just
Yeah.
like it's another step on his road, and he just keeps singing, he's just like, I just love
harmonizing
this.
with the guy who
Yeah.
kills him. I like how the one person who's like respectful to him and calls him his actual nickname is the guy
Right.
who kills him, and he not only wants to beat him in gunplay but also in singing.
In song.
I just thought that was like a funny detail. Also, but the reveal when he gets shot in the head and he sees the hole in the front of his hat and then the bloody hole in the back, so beautiful and brilliant. Yeah.
Yeah, he does. I mean, I should say the Coen Brothers, like, this is their first film shot on digital.
Yes.
And they really decided to go with like effects that they couldn't have done before. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it works so well in this. Like they
It's
did a great
seamless.
job of like, yeah, exactly.
Without the
Whereas,
weird
like,
fuzziness of what's it
Inside
called?
Llewyn Davis,
Inside
or
Llewyn
like,
Davis,
yeah.
right.
Even back to
Which
like
is the same
cinematographer,
cinematographer.
too. Yep.
Yep, and it looks fantastic. One of their
Oh
best
my
looking
god!
movies in a while.
I want to hold off on talking about him until we get to the Tom Waits segment because that's that. But we will talk about him because he's so fucking good. I don't really have anything else to say about like the theme of this one because it is. I mean, you guys can.
Well, I've heard someone describe it as like, what if this story is like about America, like on the world stage, how we perceive ourselves and then how we actually are, as like a global superpower. I don't know if I fully buy that, but I like that interpretation. But I also wanted to say, I like that Buster Scruggs calls out, he's like, when they take him for kind of like a dandy or just like a sissy or whatever at the first bar he goes to, and he's like, don't let my white duds fool you. And he's like, I've been known to break the laws of man and those of the Almighty.
Yeah.
And I was
That's
like,
a very Coen
yes,
Brothers.
I'm like, those are the themes. I was like the
Yeah.
guy from the sketch, like, oh my God. they
Yeah,
repeat
and
it.
also I'm glad you mentioned that because in that scene, especially when he's insulting the bar patrons and also when he's insulting Clancy Brown, it's so Raising Arizona in the dialogue. It's got that it's right back to like that biblical hick thing, you know? And it brought me back to it where I was like, God, they fucking love this. They write that so well. Like, when it didn't work was in The Lady Killers, where it was like Tom Hanks trying to do a sort of version of that. But like,
Tim Blake kills it.
In this one and in True Grit and then in like Raising Arizona, when they really go for like how like an absolute hick, well, you wouldn't think would speak in such like a grand way. Like they make it work so well where like, you know, he talks circles around everybody and like, it's so beautiful. Like I love all of that dialogue in all those scenes, you know? I also love the music in this one. I think there's 3 songs that get sung in this segment. And, you know, it should be mentioned, it's like a fucking 6-minute segment. It's the shortest one, I think. It's really short, but like there's 3 songs that get sung. I think 2 of them maybe were written by Gillian Welch and Dave Rawlings, and they're great. I mean, I fucking loved, you know, when a cowboy trades his, what is it? his
Spurs for wings.
Spurs for wings.
Spurs for wings,
and
or
then
whatever.
Cool Water is an old song, obviously. Then Surly
Water.
Surly Joe was like a takeoff of the Destry Rides Again. Have you ever seen that movie?
No, but I saw in the credits that it was like some other song about somebody else named Joe with slightly different lyrics.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I love how Buster Scruggs' angel version of himself is basically Hudsuckers, the same exact kind of like Looney Tunes angel with like the wings, the halo, and the
it's what you're talking about, where like Coens are so good at tapping into that like collective consciousness that we all have, where it's like, who knows if we got it from cartoons or from comic books or from like, you know, stories passed down from generations, whatever it is. Like we've talked about it over this whole series about how like they can occasionally tap into that thing. I don't know where we know that angel with the harp and the fucking wings, like where that's initially in all of our brains is, but it fits so naturally for us because they like do it so perfectly. I don't know. Tim Blake Nelson needs a shout out. He's so fucking good in this. Yeah. It's like he was...
It's hard to imagine anyone else in this.
Well, they offered it to him in 2002 as like, you know, when they were finished with Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? And they were like, hey, we're working on these short stories that we might turn into a movie someday. We got this idea for you as like a singing cowboy. That's how old that went back to.
Wow.
And he was on board from then.
Damn.
And it's pretty amazing. And then like, you know, over the years, it obviously took different shapes and stuff, but he was the only sort of long-standing part of this whole movie in that role. That's kind of why he got the titular sort of role too, I think. And
he's perfectly cast. It's such a like, again, it's such a classic Hollywood kind of like character, and like Tim Blake Nelson has such a weird, timeless, like I said, like kind of Stan Laurel kind of like affect about him that it's just beautiful. Yeah, it's awesome. But like it's weird that they like were thinking about it way back then, because to me it seems such like a, I was wondering, did it come out of their deal with Netflix? Like, you know what I mean? Like, why, like how many filmmakers have done their own anthology movie? Like, it's such a weird thing. And not that the Coen Brothers wouldn't do some weird left turn kind of thing, but it just seemed fitting to me that it would be like after this one movie that was also very disjointed and like but didn't really work for me. And then this is again their first digital film, their first streaming film, and it's like it almost it works as a Netflix thing. Like it reminds me of like I Think You Should Leave, like little 15-minute kind of episodes, you know. In fact, like I forgot how long it was. I started the movie kind of late the other night, had to pause it like after one of the episodes and started again the next night. And I was so glad I got to watch like the longest 2 kind of like in one sitting. Largely because I've never watched an anthology movie without getting a little like antsy towards the end, you know, like I don't think I finished the Mortal Remains the first time I watched it, or I was like looking at my phone by the end of it when that guy's fake French accent started. But anyway, we should talk about Near Algodons.
Yeah. I have nothing really to say except for that I don't like James Franco in it, which I already mentioned. And
bad person, like, bad actor.
Yeah, bad guy, bad actor.
Stephen Root, covered in pans, running at Franco, getting shot at, but having the bravery to just attack him. That is like the prototypical Coen Brothers character, just like an existential hero, like you know, facing death with like glee and delusion and
Man shot.
Yeah, that I don't know if that's even that funny to me, but it's like it is definitely unique.
It's got
Like, why does he say it? Like, oh, they clearly hit him in the pan. Like, you just got to say it every time he gets shot. Pan shot, just in case you were wondering. I'm not dead. Here I come.
Because it is
I'm
one of those
coming.
jokes that reads like you would read that in a book rather than on screen too. Like you can imagine sort of like a pulpy sort of book. You know, the guy screaming pan shot is like, it almost sounds like a fucking Stephen King thing. You know what I mean?
That's
like
a great call.
But yeah, so there's that. And then obviously just going to throw this out here at this point in the podcast because we've talked about it in previous things that like they treat Native Americans so terribly in this whole movie and in this segment, you know.
Oh yeah.
Well, it wasn't.
When I say that they treat him terribly, it's just like it's treated the same way that they're treated in the old Louis L'Amour books. It's just not updated in any way.
Well, that's the thing. It's like there's some of the other episodes, again, they kind of like make these things not feel like a cliche, but the Indians are one thing that just feels like absolutely like a cliche.
Right.
And the first episode, the Ballad of Buster Scruggs feels like such a kind of like deconstruction of these kind of Western myths or something like that, or just like just the Western myth like turned up to like 11. So like the kind of ridiculousness of it or like the horror of it is like, you know, kind of fresh. But the stuff with the Indians, when they come like yipping and hollering in this one, and I was just like, wait, that's what's going to happen in this? Like, you know, after like the, again, like kind of like the weirdness and kind of freshness of like a bank teller covered in pans charging the bank robber, they couldn't have any kind of creative way of like showing the conflict between like white people in the West and like Native Americans who were like living here and trying to fight them off. And then I was like, oh, I bet you, since this is like episodic, they're going to show it from this angle. You're going to kind of buy into that worldview. And then they're going to turn it around later on, pull the rug out from under you, pull the smallpox rug out from under you. Right. And that absolutely doesn't happen. And I was left a little disappointed the first time I watched it from that. Again, I'm more like, just because I'm used to it, it's less bothersome now, but it seems like such a missed opportunity.
Yeah, it's almost like boring to talk about it now, although it shouldn't be. But just because like we've gotten there, like they're bad at things. Like I don't know what else to say about it except for shame that they just keep like proving that they are not interested in telling anybody's story, but like white dudes, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I've got some thoughts on that, but I'll probably share them later. But as far as the second one goes, I think they did a pretty Coen-y job in the first two of these episodes of kind of subverting maybe your audience's expectations to a degree, like Buster Scruggs. He's just so competent at just patching literally everyone he meets. He's like, oh, well, time to shoot this guy again, too. Oh,
exactly.
Well, here we go. You know what I mean? And then, bam, he's gone, right? Like, oh, there's always going to be someone else. And then, of course, the second one, like, well, this guy just escaped, like, the jaws of death, only to be like literally thrown right back into the exact same situation, and this time he's dead now.
And executed.
It literally ends as he dies. Bam, goes black. Like, oh, okay, you know.
Kind of reminded me a little bit of The Man Who Wasn't There, in that he like actually does commit a crime, is getting put to death, and then ends up getting killed by the law for something that was absolutely not his fault and just kind of like stumbled into.
I was just going to say
the cosmic justice of his original transgression catches up with him, you know, or something.
Yeah, I was just going to say similarly, like if all of these movies within this movie have a sort of meditation on all of the themes that they tend to like, you know, examine in all of their movies, then this one to me is the most obviously like circularity kind of thing that they, you know, we've been talking about since Blood Simple, you know, like that they're so fascinated with like I said, circularity of time and actions and that kind of thing. And like this one really does sort of like meditate on that in a poor way to me, but like it was maybe that for them.
I think it's fine. I think it's a great little short film. And I also think like, I think you're right, Ian, like in all of these films, the themes are just like right on the surface because they could just like basically have like an idea of a story and like the theme of the story, like they just sort of like, that's all there is. It's just, you know, instead of like movies that get kind of more diluted, like by stretching them out, like into like a big narrative, again, with these like 3 acts, when you just have like a single theme or, you know, or like a motif or an idea, and that's the whole film. And it just starts like, again, there's just 2 points, right? The beginning and the end. And the end is like often death. Like, you know, they just make like 1 point and it like, it's so like, oh yeah, that's the Coen Brothers. And then it ends. And they're so good at telling these stories. That's the other thing. Like, each one of
really
these
are.
episodes is just like, yeah, shockingly good. All right, is that it for Near Algodones?
I mean, we can come back to it if you think of anything, but yeah, like the next one
Meal Ticket.
is Meal Ticket.
Meal freaking ticket.
Which, like,
Jesus Christ, everybody. What the
This
fuck,
one's
Liam?
dark. This one's dark.
Man.
so it's Liam Neeson as the impresario who drives around a stagecoach that converts into a stage.
Theater
Yeah,
production.
and
Stage.
what's his face from Harry Potter?
Harry Mellon.
Dursley.
Yeah, Dudley Dursley from Harry Potter. Really,
No arms, no
you know.
legs.
Okay, so I'll just go into my sort of thought, aside from how fucking dark it is and how hard it is to like watch just the most helpless a man can be, you know, silent except for in full-on performance when he's on stage and he has to do like, you know, extended soliloquies. And then he's just silent, you know, like he doesn't have a voice outside of the stage. And so then, you know, but he's like witness to Liam Neeson's character's like cruelty, but also you can tell like he knows he would be dead. Like he knows that that's the only thing that he's got to not be dead. And aside from the difficulty of watching that, which is maybe its own reason for this short, but I also felt like we've talked a lot about like the theme of inspiration sort of that they've sort of chased in their filmography, and how like, you know, the fact that like he gets replaced, he's this guy who, you know, despite having no arms and legs, his you know, whatever his performance piece is that he like recites everything from the Gettysburg Address to like soliloquies from Tempest and like different things. And
Not everything.
What's that?
I said not everything. Sorry.
Not everything. No, he doesn't do any whatever. Fuck you.
Hey.
He doesn't recite Clive Barker.
No, so anyway,
Clive Barker quotes.
he does very wordy sort of things. And then he gets replaced by a counting chicken, right?
Yeah.
And so like part of it is like when he gets replaced and when Liam Neeson eventually just like chucks him over a bridge and he's like in favor of a much more simple, like, this is all you need is like the singing chicken. I wondered how much of that was sort of them reckoning with like, are they Liam Neeson in that moment? And like, they're just like, okay, like we don't need to do these like soliloquy, like the state of, you know, art in their film world that they've been a part of for 35 years at that point or whatever it is. And they're like, we don't need to like have these like Shakespearean, you know, soliloquy fucking things. Like there's a counting chicken over here. You know what I mean? Like that's what the people are watching. That's what we need to do next. And so he just fucking chucks it over. And it almost felt like this was their movie about like making a deal with Netflix to me. Like that's
If you
what this,
think
like,
that they are identifying with Liam Neeson in this story, I have to disagree. I don't
know that they are, but I think that maybe they think that
No.
the business is like that the movie's business, the studio, whatever you call it, you know, that like the state of film right now is Liam Neeson. Maybe.
Yeah, I think they're definitely talking about the state of art and like
Yeah.
what people want and what is like appealing to the masses and like
So I don't think, no, to your point, I don't think that they're saying that like we're choosing this, but I think that like, you know, they did make a deal with Netflix and they did like.
But is Netflix a representative of like the base entertainment? I don't know that it is. Like,
I think
And
for
did they
them,
even have
they had,
Netflix in mind when they wrote this in the first place? I mean, this is like these are all
Obviously not.
stories that they
No.
wrote a long
Good
time
point.
ago.
No.
It may be
but making a
purely coincidental.
making a deal with Netflix, I don't know that that means what you're kind of implying it means, Ian, because I think like Netflix gives like creators a lot of like freedom. You know what I mean? I think they're kind of known as a place where like a filmmaker like Martin Scorsese gets a huge amount of leeway because they don't have any real budgetary restrictions because they operate on an insane deficit. If
I don't
understand,
want to
like,
be heard wrong. Like I think that like
okay.
the movies coming out of Netflix and Amazon and HBO are better than the movies coming out of major studios right now for the most part. That's maybe a, you know, grand statement, but you know what I mean? Like there's a lot of really amazing ones. And, but I do think that like, you know, they didn't want to, they like same thing with Scorsese. They all talked shit about it, maybe when they were writing this movie. Like this idea that like film is dead. Like that's what they were looking at. It's the same way that like in the 70s, if you were going to do TV, you were like, oh, you're dead. You're done. You're not an actor anymore. Or even in the 90s, you know what I mean?
Right.
And then like cut to now and it's like, oh, if you're a big star, then you get a fucking TV show. Like that's what you do. You know what I mean? Like, and so I think for them, when maybe they were writing this, it was like, you know, I mean, I know that they talked about it and then they fucking tweeted like a famous tweet where they were like, all right, we're streaming bitches or whatever, you know, like when they made the deal. Cause they're like, it was a choice to be like, okay, this idea that we have that like the grand cinema is this sort of thing that we all cling to. And we've talked about it like together that like, is that dead kind of thing? And like, what does it even mean anymore? And I think like choosing that people are no longer going to be watching a movie in a cinema and they're just going to be watching it on their couch with their phones out is like, in a way, a death of an art for the Coen Brothers.
Maybe. I don't know that it has to do so much with, or I didn't see it as having to do with like now people want to see a chicken. They didn't, you know what I mean? Like, but maybe you're right. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think that the medium,
I do know what you mean.
And I don't think the medium, since the medium
thing,
is the same cart, that I don't know how that it has to do with like streaming versus cinema. But I see what you're saying. Maybe. But yeah, basically extremely dark. I think the juxtaposition of like his incredible eloquence on stage versus his like inability to connect with like the one other human in his life, like their sad relationship and how much time is put on that.
I think it's important that like, painful. You know, his eyes, I think that guy's a great actor. You know, it's hard to like say that because he was Harry Potter's fucking shitty brother for 12 years or whatever. But like, and that's what I know him as, except for this. I did not like, speaking of Netflix or whatever, I did not like Queen's Gambit. I know a lot of people did. And he's in that. But I was so impressed with him because him not being able to connect, like to me, is a pure like, I don't know, I just could feel the weight of the burden that he was and like his understanding of how threadbare his own life was in his hands. And it's like, how can you connect with somebody when you know that not only is this person like forced to feed you and sometimes you're not bringing in any money, and if he doesn't want to feed you, he could kill you. Like, how do you like connect with somebody on that? So like, it's not like a, you know, to me, it was just like, that was all so well played in his eyes in those moments of just like, I don't have a life. Like, I gotta just keep doing this to survive. Like,
the nonverbal gestures, I think, because each of the times that the stage begins and the curtains pull back and you see him, he's looking down and to the right, kind of like he's like forlorn, like he's sad, like he's completely removed. And just that image is really kind of haunting to a degree. Like you see his total isolation and he's just exposed up on the stage for everybody to see, you know. It's really just I'm also thankful that they didn't actually show Liam Neeson committing the act, right?
Totally.
He drops the rock off and you're like, oh no. And then the last thing you see is that image of the terrain kind of passing by, the chicken in the foreground and the absence of Harry Melling's character. And that's like a really brilliant way to conclude, you know, that kind of dark blue, chilling, kind of icy vibe that it leaves you with, and it's it kind of sticks with you. Damn, that's a hard one to watch.
Just like they didn't show the kind of like final violence in a couple of their most recent movies too.
Right? No Country for Old Men, especially.
Yep. And the other one you didn't like, Burn After Reading.
Burn After Reading. But
I also want to say, like, you know, in this movie, I mean, in this episode and some of the other ones, it's worth noting that these aren't just crimes of passion or crimes. You know what I mean? They're crimes that come about because of like human systems. Like they're not like individual actions as much as they are like, I need to eat, this is too hard, like, or like, you know, the law, like, oh, he was with cows that weren't his, kill him. You know what I mean? Like, so it's these systems, like these very, very harsh systems when you like, I think these Western stories and these kind of like frontier stories, they exist on this like precipice of civilization where life is, again, like so cheap and like these systems are so harsh that it kind of like, you know, heightens the contradictions of like how humanity like how cruel humanity is to itself, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Shall we move on?
Before we move on, I want
Terrible
to
episode.
shout out that, you know, the sound design in that segment where like, you know, the wind howling like over his speeches, like it just puts you in this sort of like, again, I said it, but like impossible to live in these circumstances. Like it just like really ramps up. And then, you know, it's not like that when the chicken is performing. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's just like, it cuts to like a pretty serene little scene when the chicken's performing. At least like it's a little
It's all sunny, even though it's dark out. It's like there's like a lamp,
yeah,
like
exactly,
a warm glow.
Exactly. And then, but then like anytime, was his name Harry Melling?
Yes.
Chris? Yeah. Anytime he's giving one of his speeches, it's like he has to shout over the wind. Like they fucking, it reminded me of No Country for Old Men because the way that like, you know, they didn't use any music in this, you know, Liam Neeson sings a little ditty or whatever, but like this one is score free, but then they just use like the sound of like sand blowing all over them. You know, it's
how tragic is it too when the woman when he takes him to the whorehouse and the woman's like, want to buy some loving for your friend? He's like, no. Has he ever or whatever? And he's like, yeah, once. And then you're just kind of like, wait, what? Yeah. And you're just left to like imagine.
Show me that movie.
That's
just masterful filmmaking in like 8 minutes or whatever it is.
Exactly. And that's what like it's so great about this movie because they really got to practice that. They're like, we have 8 minutes, you know, like what can we pile on this kid's life, you know what I mean, and the audience to like maximize the tragedy. So well done, so incredibly well done. All right, speaking of well done, All Gold Canyon, absolute delight of an episode.
Best. I love it.
Really good. So I want to just say, like, for me, besides the like tour de force of the opening episode, All Gold Canyon and the girl who got rattled, or the gal who got rattled, are the strongest like storytelling episodes. And I think it makes sense that those are the two that are adapted from existing short stories. Because I think working within a previously existing structure meant they could kind of like play around and like kind of like play with tension or play with, you know, whatever kind of dramatic stuff they wanted to, put the jokes that they wanted in, put the visuals that they wanted in, and like know that they were going to have this like powerful like ending to the story. Does that make sense? Like I really feel like that allowed, like gave them the kind of like freedom that they needed to like just absolutely like nail the whole thing. So anyway, All Gold Canyon.
This one did a great job, I think, of all of them in my book, of creating the world that it lives in, because this literally takes place just within this canyon, right? It opens and closes with like the cinematic, the scenery, like the lights shining, like it's this gold, like you know, without the gold, right? It's just this shimmering place, and it really sets the tone for the rest of the, you know, the.
It's so beautiful. It's filmed like. It looks like a colorized Western. Like it looks like a colorized black and white movie. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And like
or like Technicolor.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that comes from like the digital filmmaking. Like again, this movie's look is like so strong and so powerful, and it has like kind of like a surreal kind of quality to it, because you are like, you're not even sure like what is real and what is fake, except when that horrible CG deer comes in. I really have to like protest against that. Like you couldn't get a freaking real deer. I saw, you know, there's a deer in, you know, All That Heaven Allows. Like we can get a deer in 2020.
You know how hard it is to train a deer to like stand right in the middle of a stream?
I trained a deer. It's not that hard.
You know, well, you know, you're better than everybody else, Travis.
Most people.
But it does look amazing.
I appreciate the difficulty, but I cannot accept that.
To your point though, about like this one is quietly maybe the funniest one. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like the dialogue, like the lines that Tom Waits gets to have to himself are so fucking funny and well written. And like you said, like because they adapted it, maybe that gave them a little bit more of like a playground to like add these little things. Because when he says things like, how high can a bird count anyway? Or like, that's such a fucking great, that's like a, I would have guessed that like Tom Waits ad-libbed that. Of course he didn't, but like that's such like a perfect line for Tom Waits to say specifically.
It's also a nice reference to the movie that came before, the episode that came before it, right?
Where the chicken's counting. Sure.
Right.
Yeah, I thought of that too.
I didn't think of that. It's hilarious.
Yeah, but
it is a great line though. Great line.
And it's more eggs out. Yeah.
It's more heartwarming than like laugh out loud funny, but I get what you're saying. I mean, it is so like it's so
funny. Like
it's so delightful.
It's
so like delightful.
But and then when he's screaming, it's the same thing in a less delightful way. But when he's screaming, it didn't hit anything important. It's just guts. It's like you can't not love that. Like, it's so funny. I mean, maybe people don't,
he's too real. His performance is so like my wife like loves this episode. Like this movie she's like into, but really like that is the episode that she loves. And like she's like, it's just like watching a guy. Like there's no acting. She's like, I'm not witnessing acting. Like I just completely buy this performance as just like a prospector that they just happened to film.
Yeah.
If his performance wasn't so captivating, it would not have the, you know what I mean? It would not be as entertaining. But
it also does that thing like I just was talking about of like tapping into this cultural idea we have of a grizzled prospector so perfectly. Like wherever that comes from, who knows? Maybe it's from Treasure of the Sierra Madre, or maybe it's from fucking, Toy Story 2, whatever it is. Like we've got this idea of like the old fucking prospector and like pants that button in the back and like and it's like it scratches that itch for you, like when you see it on screen, like filmed so perfectly. I don't know,
but it feels so fresh and like, and when you see him actually, like I've seen panning for gold done a million times in movies. I never had the dimmest understanding of what that actually was or what it entailed or how it led to you getting gold. I'm like, you just put a pan in the dirt and then you maybe get gold
in the river. And I'm like, why is he going over to the bank and doing the dirt in it?
I'm like, man, that was easy.
Like, thank you. That's so great, right?
But and it's like this movie really lets you like see the like what that is and what that entails and like the work behind it. And I think that has to do with what the theme of the movie is. And I don't know if you guys have any ideas about this, but somebody I read like when the movie came out, like their take on it, and I was like, oh, that's really interesting. The guy who shoots him is credited at the end as like the young man or something like that. And this person that I read, they were basically like, this movie is about, if you're like an artist, if you're like the Coen Brothers, right? And you have this super unique aesthetic, thematic kind of sensibility that you bring to movies. And then you spend years developing it, honing it until you have this like singular style that's like so iconic and so your own. And then towards the end of your career, watching people like Danny Boyle or like Wes Anderson or like Edgar Wright come out and like literally just be like, oh, that's mine now.
You let me
and
do all
like,
the work.
And that is like,
I totally buy that.
And I think the fact that he's old and that guy's young, it doesn't have to be about artists. It doesn't have to be about the Coen Brothers. But I think, again, coming right after Meal Ticket, about like a failed artist or like the art's inability to like, I don't know, make anything good. And like, I feel like this one was them talking about like, what it feels like to be getting old and feel like your work is just like getting stolen out from under you after like a lifetime.
Well, and Near Algodones too also involves a younger man stealing an older guy's, shit and basically kind of paying the price for it, right?
Trying to,
But it is worth mentioning that like Tom Waits kills the guy and then rides away with the gold. Yeah. And I think that like, to me, like, you said it doesn't have to be about the Coen Brothers or about inspiration or whatever you want to call it. But I did think that like the way that he talks to Mr. Pocket, which is like, the gold vein that he knows is in this riverbed, basically, like it's like he's talking to literally inspiration to me. Like he really feels it. That's how I was interpreting it. Was like, cool. Yeah. It's like that, like, when you're out there searching for inspiration and you're like calling out and being like, are you here? No. And he's like digging a hole and it's like, there's something there, but I'm not quite, that's not it. And then he like goes 12 feet to the left. And it reminded me of how we always talk about them like tweaking the dials and like being like, it's not right there. It's not exactly right here, but it's like, and he's like, where are you, Mr. Pocket? Like I couldn't not think that it's them being like, where is this like key thing of inspiration? And maybe you're right, maybe it is like exactly those two things blended, but in this one they're cocky and they're just like, you can do it, but you can't fucking find Mr. Pocket like I can find Mr. Pocket.
Exactly. You have to work for it. And I think it's worth showing that like, it's about panning for gold, which is a thing you've seen in movies a million times, but they're like, no wait, that's actually work. It's not just like you stick a pan and you find gold. It's work. It's a job. You have to do the work to like actually know what you have and to like find something and take it with you. And yeah, maybe that is what it's about.
Yeah.
But delightful. And yeah, I think that filming it like it's like in heaven. And when he has that delicious fish breakfast and egg, like, I don't know, it's just such a
Yeah, and just like in one of my I do these stupid little like
podcast.
podcast. No, I mean Travis actually made like an actual music video for one of my music songs that you guys should all, if you're listening to this, check out.
If you like music songs, check out
You like
his
music
band.
songs. Don't pay attention to the song, but Travis's direction is great. But I will, when I don't have Travis at my disposal, I'll just throw together like clips of old movies usually and like put them over my songs. And I did use this like I think it was probably, 61 or something like that, whatever it was, Disney nature film. And I just took a bunch of scenes from this like hour and 40-minute long. It was like one of the first documentary Oscars, or maybe it was the first documentary Oscar that it won. But the way that the bird is filmed and like random nature shots in this movie took me straight back to like that kind of nature photography that was like, early nature photography, like when people were first like, what if we just bring a camera out to fucking Beaver Island and like film beavers? You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. I just thought it was beautiful.
Speaking of beautiful, I just love fucking Tom Waits' voice, by the way. I just like that
Yes,
gravelly, like, there's no one got his voice, and like hearing him sing like a old-timey song. By the way, as soon as he heard it, I heard this song this time, that he's coming out of the woods. I'm like, The Departed. Right, because Jack Nicholson's like, bless ye and keep ye, oh Mother Machree. And he puts his like Irish twist on it. And like, So anyway, I love Tom Waits. Love this one.
Yeah,
this was
so
probably
good.
my favorite episode of the movie.
So
I think
good.
that's fully fair. I think
his
it's so
look,
good.
his look in the episode is really good too, especially when he's leaving. I
So
want to
good.
copy that look when I go camping. Yeah,
Well, that's
just
what
throwing
I
it out
mean.
there.
It's that cultural thing that's like in our bones of
Being
like,
hot.
Yeah.
It's
Yes.
it's in my bones.
It's in your bones.
All right.
All right, we gotta
Moving
keep
on to
going
part
through this.
5, the gal who got rattled. This is my favorite episode.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's just like such a wonderful story and kind of like almost sentimental in a way that the Coen brothers are almost never.
Oh, right.
And like
100%.
dealing with like
it was
love
sentimental.
in a way that like they never do. And
Yeah.
of course they kind of like pull the rug out from under that. And of course there's like many layers of irony like through along the way, but it's still very like touching and heartbreaking. What'd you guys think?
I love it. I mean, like I said, it's probably my favorite too. If it wasn't for the just zaniness of that first one that pulled me in so much, it's tied with that in a completely different way. Because I think it is like the humbleness of it. Again, we've talked about like in all of these, there's an element of like how impossible it was to live in the Old West. But like this one, it just feels so joyless to try to be alive back then. Like there's nothing worth living for. It's
Maybe
like,
we could find a comfort with each other. You know, that's what he says. And
Right?
it's just like, I hope
Right?
so.
it's like, I hope
So
so. You know,
sad.
it's like,
Yeah.
you get these, even when she's laughing at the dog, like with the, what is it, prairie dogs, and it's like the first time you've really seen her sort of giddy for a second, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
And it's like, it's tragedy right there. It's tragedy's coming.
By the way, her reaction when he actually proposes to her and her face is just this sheer like mask of surprise is like my favorite part maybe of the whole movie.
Good call.
Like a
Her
single
acting
shot.
is great, yeah.
I love her. She's so great in this.
I saw her in that Kumail Nanjiani movie, and I didn't really like it that much, and I didn't really love her performance specifically, and
like that movie.
so I was so blown away by her in this movie because I thought she was like, after Tom Waits, like the best performance, maybe after Tim Blake Nelson, but like right up there, and in a very different style, very different style.
The humbleness of it, and like, I don't remember who the actor is that plays the guy that ends up proposing to her.
Bill Heck.
Well,
he's only in like 5 other movies. He's not in a lot of stuff.
He was great too.
Yeah.
He's great. And like, again, I'll just say that word again, because it just feels like it's so humble. Like the way that like they talk to each other, and the way that like his ambitions are like relatively small, and like
completely,
her ambitions are incredibly small. And like, I just like, again, it just left me feeling like heartbroken, but to break your heart in 12 minutes is fucking such a feat or whatever, you know, because it's like, it's like, like you said, we've said it before, but like to take you from point A to point B, where it starts basically around a dinner table with like the most Coen Brothers old ladies, like, you know, just doing like the most Coen Brothers old ladies lines, dialogue, you know, being like, you're gonna have another one of them chicken and biscuits or whatever, you know, it's just like, I don't know, that it starts with that, which is like a sort of, you know, Raising Arizona style comedic scene almost, but also it's dark, you know, there's no light in that room, there's no like, except for firelight, and like it's already setting you up for like tragedy.
It's a weird world, and people are like you know, arranged marriages and stuff like that.
Exactly.
And like, it's a different world, and
this
it's
time
kind
I
of
caught
harsh.
the line. The second time that I watched it, I caught the line where she's like I think it opens with the line maybe of like her being like, no, it's not a contagious cough, it's a nervous cough or something.
Yeah,
like that.
I was highly tuned to that. I was that must just be our like
so
COVID
much.
reality, but like that was very weird. That was very weird.
No, because that's exactly what you say anytime you cough in public now.
Yeah.
No, it's just a nervous cough.
Oh my gosh. Anyway, Mr. Knapp is such a funny version of like a Coen Brothers like stock character of like a solid, simple dude.
Yes.
But this is the only version of that where instead of being just like stand up for whatever happens, he literally fails at everything he tries to do for her. Like,
I guess he does. Yeah.
He absolutely does. Like, he's just like, ma'am, and like he's like an emotional like consolation to her, but like whenever he tries to actually, he's like, talk to your boy, this little, you know, shrimpy, like 14-year-old kid or whatever. And he's like, he wouldn't relent on the $400. I apologize. Like,
he goes to kill the dog.
He kills the dog. You hear the shot. She's just like,
Or
no.
whatever
And then you hear like 5 more shots. And he's like, I don't think I shot him at all.
And the first time I thought he like did that on purpose to like not have to kill the dog, you know? But I'm like, oh wait, no.
That
he
makes
just
sense too.
up.
But he actually is incompetent at everything except for leading the wagon, and even that he hates because he's not like a natural hard ass like the other guy, Mr. Arthur.
Yeah.
But I think he had some wisdom, which is like he talks about how certainty is the easy path, right? When they have that kind of like that moment after they've agreed to be married, and they talk about their kind of like philosophy on life, and then in the next scene when she's out by the prairie holes, you know, Mr. Arthur's like, this is what's going to happen, blah, blah, blah. And he gives her this kind of like, sort of like the hard-nosed of reality of what's going to happen. And of course, with tragic results.
Yeah. And, you know, it's understandably tragic because she's had this life where like, of course she's going to get fucking so scared of the, you know, imposing sort of threat of the Indians that she just kills herself because like, not just because he told her to, but because like she's had the fucking life, like why wouldn't it lead to her getting taken away by Native Americans?
I think it is because he told her to, because like she was actually once her brother was like out of the picture, she was kind of like a more solid person than you would expect. And I do think it was like a moment of kind of frailty on her part, like to like kind of just accept what this guy told her about the reality of the situation. Like she could have shot at the other, even if there's only one other Indian who's like going to attack her, she could have shot him instead, you know, but instead she shot herself. So I don't know. I feel like it was kind of like that tough guy imposing his will on her, and she kind of reverted back to her previous, you know, life when her brother was kind of her boss. And that was kind of the tragedy of it. But I mean, that's just, I don't know. That's just,
it feels like happenstance when the whole thing happens. Like,
yes,
it's just
that's
like,
true.
you know, she chases after a dog that was supposed to be dead, sees prairie dogs and is laughing, and the dog is barking too loud, and it all shouldn't have happened.
Right.
Because, you know, they're safe with the wagon train, which is also shot beautifully to me. Like, I thought that whole segment
when the wagons are like lit at night, that was really cool.
But yeah, so then like, you know, it all happening sort of really fast like that. And like at a point where, you know, you do sort of like maybe have bought into that this is like a weird, humble love story between her and Mr. Knapp, you know? Yes. And then it's just like, no, it's a tragedy. Like it's going to end sadly. And it's for no other reason than because like, she fucking happened to wander away. I don't know. And like listen to somebody who gave her a gun. Like,
I do like Mr. Knapp, to your point, Travis, how he's kind of inept at everything, because up to this point, almost every male, like at least the killers or the people that are like taking things on, are just absurdly good at shooting or killing or doing everything. Like Buster Scruggs literally shoots the individual fingers off of a guy from like a football field away. Like, other people are they dispatch their people.
Mirror.
Yeah, exactly. Or the older guy that she's with who's
like
shooting the Indians. He's still alive. He's taking them out from far away. And then there's Mr. Knapp, who just can't get a single thing right. So it's kind of a nice like way to see a like actual human, fallible person who can actually fail, in this world. They're not just all like the romanticized gunslinger that can't miss, so to speak.
Yeah, and he's extremely relatable too. He's like a very like kind of sweet guy, and he has like kind of dimensionality to him, whereas Mr. Arthur is extremely one-dimensional and seems like he's just stepped out of one of these old Western books.
Yep.
And the way that like he doesn't like kind of like make space for Mr. Knapp's feelings when he's talking to him about his proposal and stuff like that. It's like very sad. Again, you're like, they don't, to break your heart in 12 minutes is a big feat, but like the Coen Brothers don't even normally go for that in any amount of time. I feel like they wouldn't. Absolutely. They wouldn't go for that for longer than 12 minutes. I feel like they kind of like.
No, they have been so disinterested with like.
Yeah.
Even aside from Raising Arizona, which is like a beautiful love story.
It's their most romantic.
But aside from that, they're so disinterested in like love stories. Like the most that they have aside from that is like Fargo with like Marge and Doug or whatever.
The beginning and the end of the movie, maybe. Yeah, exactly.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
Mm-hmm. You don't think Intolerable Cruelty was a rapturous love story? Come on, guys.
I guess they're just bad at it sometimes.
No, yeah, but that's a good point. Like Intolerable Cruelty and the other big one, which is the Hudsucker Proxy, both totally the romance of those movies, which is supposed to be the central storyline, is not really very
fails
powerful.
Miserably.
Whereas this one, in such a short amount of time, when they actually put their talents to it, and find sort of like an entry point that's like fits their interests, in the story they want to tell, they're incredibly effective at it. Like, again, it's like beautiful, but also like stupid, and it's like it's just such a good story and so tragic at the end, really horrible. And the way when she's holding the gun and she's like, "Yes, Mr. Arthur. Yes, Mr. Arthur." Like she keeps calling him Mr. Arthur. Again, I think that's why she's like, falling back into kind of her old kind of more.
But I think that's what I meant when I was saying that. Like she's so like, why wouldn't she do that? Like in this world that she's lived in her whole life, where it's like it's all leading to death at any given second in that world. It's like I said before, it's impossible to live. At least live joyously, at most live joyously, and at least just to live. Like it seems like, sometimes you watch these movies and you're just like, oh no, I wouldn't live. I wouldn't live there.
There's a tweet that I read today where it was like sitting in bed and literally feeling the level of anxiety that like my ancestor had, like running away from wild tigers or something.
Right.
Like, yeah, we're a soft generation. That's like part of the fun of watching this movie.
Or maybe that like, anxiety's just got to be there, and we've just, it's going to be
there. That's
true
too. That's true. Or we like build it for ourselves. We create this reality where we have to like answer all these emails and do this stupid work.
Right.
Where it's like, how much stress can the human brain endure? We'll just like whatever it is, we'll adjust our reality to that setting in order to like torture ourselves to make somebody money. But I was gonna say something else, which is just thank you. But
I mean, I could talk about this one more, but I don't think I need to because it is just beautiful. Like it's
great episode. Now we're on to the final chapter, easily the weakest. I think we're all in agreement.
Yeah, like what happened with this one? The Mortal Remains. What is this? I mean,
okay. So what happened with it, and like now we're getting back to like the problems I had with Hail Caesar. Filmed on a sound stage and like basically using like green screen or whatever to create the set in a way that they didn't do for some of the other episodes, and it feels bad. It feels like I mean, I guess it kind of works just because the writing is so play-like anyway, so theatrical, that it kind of works as like a separate thing, but it doesn't really match the kind of like feeling of the other episodes.
No, it doesn't. And I think that's its biggest fault, is just that like it
doesn't fit
to me. Like I hadn't thought of this as like a series of short films until this watch. I thought of it as more of like a like a literary thing, like a sort of like playing in this sort of world of like the Old West books kind of thing. But this one feels like what I don't like about short films, you know, like in a weird way, where it's like no budget, you know, you get some great actors. Like I love some of these actors for sure. Like Brendan Gleeson, you know, fucking great. But you know, and they sort of like speak in smart talk, for lack of a better word, like sort of like highfalutin smart talk that's like above the audience in a lot of ways. Like I couldn't figure it out, you know, like I don't know exactly what this is going for.
Well,
I
they're
know
all
that
talking
it's like
they're all talking at like different levels of sophistication, which I kind of liked. Sort of
Yeah.
like each person like out sophisticates the next in their like view of humanity and stuff like that. But it's sort of like,
but it is a little pretentious to me. Like as filmmakers, they're a little pretentious in this one. I don't know. Like
It feels like a bad setup for a joke, like a Frenchman, an Irishman, an Englishman, a trapper, and a genteel woman all walk into a stagecoach kind of a deal. You know, I don't know. It just left me kind of just puzzled and scratching
well,
my
it
head.
also feels less Western than like one of those like kind of gothic, like macabre, like spooky stories from like, you know, like Robert Louis Stevenson or something like that, or like you know, something that was written like 100 years ago, and it's like men on a stagecoach, and there's going to be some and then there's going to be some twist where it's like they're actually in purgatory or something like that. But
if
then
like the lady pulled off her scarf, sorry,
right, exactly.
If the lady pulled off her scarf and her head fell off,
yeah,
you know,
Like
when they go in the
corpse
hotel,
on top isn't dead or something, or the coachman
when they go in
is
the
a demon or something. I don't know, whatever.
yeah, well, the coachman looks like he's a supernatural being, just
Right.
like kind of just like the guy who beats up Llewyn Davis in that alleyway. He's sort of like a figure, like an iconic like cartoon figure of like an evil coachman, or like a demon. But yeah, you feel like, oh, when they go in the hotel, it's going to be revealed that the hotel is really hell or something like that. But then it never happens.
I thought that was revealed. Like
And
I thought that was not.
It's not revealed, and it's sort of like, but to me, it's sort of like, well, am I wrong? Did I miss something?
No, it wasn't revealed on screen, but I didn't find it vague enough of like this is a ethereal haunting thing that like I thought you were supposed to take out of it, that like these guys were going to hell. Like this is like the coach to eternity or whatever.
To me, it felt like almost like it was going to be a supernatural twist, and then it wasn't, and it's sort of like, what do you, the viewer, think? Almost like another like you know, cat in the box paradox, where it's like, we're not going to tell you, we're not going to do the spooky twist that like every other version of this story would have. We'll just like leave it at that, which I kind of liked in theory, but it didn't. Again, it just like gave it a very kind of anticlimactic ending to what was already a pretty drawn out, pretty dry, pretty and at the end of a 2-hour film, a very tiresome kind of
like
movie.
2.5
episode.
hours.
Yeah,
They're certainly known for like ending abruptly, but just not with such less like, you know, like No Country for Old Men just ends abruptly. You know,
I think if there's a reason for this to be the final one, because also they didn't have to have them in the order that they were in, you know, this could have been buried in the center. But if there's a reason for this one to be the final one, is because, you know, it is sort of the most, I don't know, maybe I read it differently than you, but it's the most on the nose about like death in the Old West, right? Like they're talking about it. You get the idea that like, or at least I got the idea that like, these are guys that are, whether or not it pays off or not, like you're at least meant to think that these are guys like on a coach and they're maybe dead, maybe who knows what's happening, but like somebody's dead on the roof at least. And like
you're seeing sort this guy dip into darkness.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
they can't stop the coach until they get to the final thing.
You never really get any like understanding of why they're all there together and what's like, you know what I mean? Like it just felt like that to me. And it's like, okay, maybe this was them like tying up the idea that like death in the Old West, like what the fuck? Like it's, you know, it's like looming kind of, I don't know, presence or something. I don't know. I'm doing some work for it, but just that's what it sort of was to me, was like they're most death centric of the, you know, I don't know.
Well, I liked all the different characters' views of like the different kinds of people in the world. The one guy who's like, yeah, all people are the same. And then, you know, there's good people and bad people. And then no, like literally people are unknowable. Each person is like an unknowable entity. And then of course the like, no, there's two kinds of people, living and dead. And that, but the other thing that the guy said is that like the fascination that people have is with stories. I thought that was like kind of important, right? And that was like sort of like almost like an artist statement of the Coen Brothers. Like you could almost look at the two British guys as like the Coen Brothers like stand-ins, which would make the goateed guy maybe Joel because he's the big brother. I don't know. But I also like that they said they talked about watching the eyes of people as they realized that they were going to die and had to like make their peace with it or come to terms with it. And I thought of the like dead bovine eyes of like all the people that Anton Chigurh killed in No Country for Old Men, and how they were just kind of like had this like kind of dimly puzzled look as they kind of were like, what's this guy up to? You know, as like
they don't even know what's happening to them
was like right in front of their face. Because when he was saying like we love to watch their eyes, I was like, wait, the Coen Brothers also love to watch people's eyes as they face their death. So well,
there's another great eyes shot of when, you know, the first not the first death, but the first like duel in Ballad of Buster Scruggs, when he shoots the 5 fingers off of the guy, and he's just staring at his fingerless hand, and it's like, I don't know, his eyes are very wide in that second too, which is like, and then he just gets blasted, you know. Anyway, I hear you. But yeah, it's the weakest chapter in this, I think. You know, even the James Franco one, while he stands out as bad to me in it, like it's got some cool moments and it's got some like good imagery and it's even exploring something, you know. That
I also read that they had to cast a 16-year-old girl in order for James Franco to be able to deliver that line about her.
I'm not laughing at that.
It's important.
Not funny. It's bad.
You know, I do research one time. You know, you guys should support this.
Good. I'm glad you did. I mean,
thank you.
If for people who don't know, James Franco is canceled. He's a bad guy.
The mortal remains. Wait, the mortal remains. I also like the Trapper. The Trapper does say something about like, I don't understand the gibberings of the nations, and he's talking about basically Indian language and stuff. And I thought that was like, at least they had some like overt bigotry, which I appreciated. You know what I mean? Like to like call attention to, but a little too late. But yeah. All right. Well, that's the Ballad of Buster Scruggs. Pretty good. I loved it. I'm glad you guys enjoyed it. Chris, what was?
I think the fact that, again, some of them really subvert your expectations. So when you are fully aware, and I remembered it so vividly this time, I think partly because it's such an anthology where the stories are so confined. In a normal Coen Brothers movie, there's so many little twists and plots and changes that I can't always remember all the little nuances. Even when I watch Big Lebowski again, I'm like, oh yeah, that little subtle thing that I might have forgotten about. This one has such short, brief little episodes. I remembered every one of them fully. And so when I watched it again, I was less surprised. Obviously, there was like, I'm watching for certain things rather than like watching the plot unfold. And I think that's kind of what I meant when I said it was a different experience. Not a necessarily bad experience, but I do like to be kind of surprised. So there's certain movies I really wish I could see again for the first time. And I kind of wish this was one of those. Like I could see it again through brand new eyes. Still enjoyed it. It's still a good movie, but on the whole, as an entire movie, I don't think it's one of my favorites of theirs, but I do love the ones that they did really well. And I enjoyed it the second time.
It definitely works, in a different way than a lot of their movies, like I was kind of saying. And I kind of like that. I like that they were just able to kind of like, kind of encapsulate a single theme or a single concept so purely, and it really seemed to free them creatively or reinvigorate them or something. And I thought it was shockingly good, honestly. I mean, I remember when this movie came out on Netflix, and it was after a couple movies that weren't heralded as kind of like as much as some of their earlier movies. And I was like, oh, how the mighty have fallen. You know what I mean? I was totally expecting like like this, like I didn't know what it was. I think this was one of the first movies that ever by any director that I cared about that came directly to Netflix, and I was just like, what the hell is, I didn't know what to expect. And when I turned it on, and I was like kind of blown away. And watching it again, I think because it's like an anthology and because like it's a lot to take in the first time you watch it. I didn't have like a super vivid memory of it again until I started watching it. I was like, oh yeah. But I'm so glad I got to revisit it because it rules.
And I honestly think like the structure of it for me, like I cannot imagine that I will go 3 years without turning on the Tom Waits one again. Like I just feel like I don't have to watch the whole thing if I don't want to. I think that, even the ones maybe I wouldn't rush back to watch, like the meal ticket or something like that, like have a lot of, there's a lot worthwhile that I might just watch it again, like sooner than later also. But, I can't imagine that I'll watch the James Franco one again or the,
we get it, Ian. You're a good person.
I will for sure throw on the, Ballad of Buster Scruggs or the fucking Gold Canyon, like probably fucking next year. Like I love them so much and they're so much fun. Like,
yeah,
I don't know.
Absolutely.
So did you guys prepare some final thoughts, or do you want to should we do our final rankings of their movies first?
No, I want to rank them afterward because my rankings, I'll tell you, switched so much that I want to end with my rankings or with our rankings, if that's okay. Because, I'd have to describe my final thoughts on the Coen Brothers to get there, basically.
Gotcha.
Which I don't mind going first. I don't know. I didn't write anything like, 2,500 words on the Coen Brothers or anything like that. I just sort of wrote some notes on well, I'll say this. I waited until this week to finally try to answer the questions that I asked myself, going into this series of what did they mean to culture as a whole? I've thought about all those things, but what are, we've obviously talked a lot about the themes that they've covered and stuff like that, but I was more interested in answering this question as what have they done? Where do they stand in culture? I guess was the question that I was asking myself as I was writing these notes. And the epiphany that I had is that this idea that I've had where they keep reinventing themselves over the last 35 years, where they'll hit a plateau and then scale it back or anything like that, it's kind of false to me now, I realize. I think that you're right, Travis. You mentioned it a long time ago that they sort of just kind of make a movie, and if it works, it works, and if it doesn't, it doesn't. But I do think that they have had one major reinvention, which was the No Country for Old Men. I think that all of their movies should not be looked at as the Hudsucker Proxy into Fargo. That's not really a reinvention. It just happens that Fargo worked. It's still got the same amount of sweatiness and the same amount of energy behind it. It just works. You know what I mean? Whereas Hudsucker Proxy didn't necessarily. But the No Country for Old Men split is a diametric sort of switch in the way that they make movies to me.
How so?
And, obviously this isn't 100% because there's things in Buster Scruggs that almost could have come out in their early days, but I think that they went from the movies that they make from No Country for Old Men on are straightforward genre pictures in a lot of ways. They aren't really trying to dissect as much what makes a genre movie as much as they are trying to just, in a Howard Hawks way, make a straightforward Western or make a straightforward sort of, fucking comedy or whatever, they aren't really trying to ramp up. And this, like I said, sweatiness that's in those early ones where it's they came out of the gate with Blood Simple and they redefined what a film noir movie was. They immediately knew how to make a film noir great, but then they also decided to okay, but what if we just figured out what isn't in those film noir movies and ramp that up and find the absurdity in that, in the violence and in the just, I don't know, I guess that's it, but other things too. And then same thing with Raising Arizona, where it's what if we took a romantic comedy and made it a Looney Tunes movie, made it a fully zany fucking madcap. I'm just going to use movie trailer words because they work, but for lack of a better word, deconstruction, right? And it's they went from filmmakers that really deconstructed genre to making genre movies, in my mind, in that year, 2006 or whatever it was. And I think that that's the polar shift, And with that in mind, I was thinking about where they stand in culture And I think that you have to like, you know, they're boomers obviously, but I think that you have to look at who their audience was and what their audience took from them in those early days. And I do think that if they like have any lasting impression besides just these classic movies that they've made, the, you know, 7 or 8 fucking really classic ones, and then the other, you know, 7 or 8 that are like really good and fun to watch. It's that like between Raising Arizona and Blood Simple and Fargo and those sort of early days movies, even Barton Fink I would throw in there, you get these people in the 80s and 90s and early 90s that are watching that. And I think that like they kind of defined what would become Gen X, like in a lot of ways. Like I think them and David Lynch and, you know, Jonathan Demme and like these people, like what Gen X is having kind of a moment right now where people are like, let's not forget about this generation that like, you know, existed. And it's important that like how absurd the Coen Brothers thought the world was or think that the world is, and how like easily that translates to like Mr. Show with Bob and David coming out. You know what I mean? Like I think that like you can draw a direct parallel, not just from like the Coen Brothers Raising Arizona to like, you know, alternative comedy in the late 90s, but just as easily from like, you know, Raising Arizona to literally like documentaries like King of Kong and like these things that like, Travis, you look confused by that, but I think my thinking is that like this dissection of like sort of disaffected characters that see the world as like a little bit absurd and a little bit cynical, but also like trying to make their way in it. And sometimes it's like, you know, a Big Lebowski style, like a man for his place, like that's, you know, zen like and rolling along. And sometimes it's like a Nicolas Cage, a man for his place, that's like just doing what he can, but they're all sort of a little bit disaffected. And I think that like that attitude, and even the dissection of that attitude in Fargo, which is like, obviously Marge Gunderson isn't disaffected, but like it's playing in that world of like, how can you think this? Like, it's like, you know, it's all this idea of like, what became the sort of like grunger mentality in a lot of way of like, or if not grunger, at least alternative mentality of like, what's it all about? And also who cares? I don't know. Like maybe that's sort of
well,
like,
whatever, never mind.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, well, whatever, never mind. Exactly. Thank you. And I think that that's so important. Like, I think that they are right there with like, you know, in the same way that like the Pixies were listening to like the Beatles and the, you know, Beach Boys and like, Led Zeppelin and stuff like that. And then being like, okay, but let's do that. But what if we screamed as loud as we could, repent, repent, repent. You know what I mean? Like, and like dissecting it that way. And then like that became Nirvana from the Pixies, you know, it's like, it's the same kind of line that you could draw from like the Coen Brothers watching film noir movies and being like, okay, but we're going to have like his arm wrapped around the window, stabbed through with a knife, and then he's shooting through the other window, but at nothing. And it's like so absurd and out there. And then like you get Pulp Fiction from that. You know what I mean? Like in a lot of ways. Like, I don't know. I think that they really helped define this sort of like second lost generation of like 90s people. I don't know. And I think that that's beautiful. And now they live in this world where they're still making beautiful movies, but they don't need to have that sort of effect. In the same way that the Gen Xers aren't really pushing forward through politically or culturally that like, you know, other generations have continued. Like, I feel like the Coen Brothers are like, they aren't trying that hard to like change the world anymore as much as they're just like, we're just going to make as good movies as we can, you know? Like, I don't know. Does that make sense to you guys?
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
We'll never have a Gen X president because of everything you just said.
Yeah.
They're the lost generation.
Yeah. But I think that like, you know, they're also important. And I think that like the Coen Brothers really maybe were at least part of a movement that defined them, you know?
Yeah.
I think that like, even though they aren't Gen Xers, obviously, but like they were, Gen Xers were the audience for them. And it's very clear to me that Gen Xers were the audience for them.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're definitely of their time and place. And I think that taking film noir and like that kind of like existentialism that came out of that and then putting it into like just a completely absurd kind of like modern setting, like, you know, it was defined by the Coen Brothers and David Lynch and Jim Jarmusch and like a couple other filmmakers that were happening at that exact moment.
Yeah.
It's like, it can't be a coincidence that it like those filmmakers and others that were like less, you know, powerful or prolific or successful, like were so in the same, on the same cultural wavelength. You know what I mean? It really was like
they're all doing it at
like
that moment.
surfing like a wave of like I don't know, that defined that like moment for sure.
Even when you dissect the themes that they're going after, it really translates to a lot of the themes that Gen Xers sort of question. You know, what is a man? Like, what's it all about when it just keeps coming back around again? Like that sort of thing of like, you know, it's just going to keep going. Like, that's not something that like millennials really bother themselves with. I think that like there's a part of it that's like, you know, as like, I don't know what you call our generation, but it's like between the two, you know, maybe. But there's a part of it that feels like it's millennials have this thing of like, what's the point? Because we'll never get ahead kind of thing. But the Coen Brothers and Gen Xers had a more like round and round we go. You know, like I think that that's like right in there, whether it came from the Coen Brothers or whether it came from just like this movement that was happening, like a national sort of, you know, apathy
Malaise,
that grew. Yeah. But it was that thing, and it's so present in all of the Coen Brothers movies still. I don't know. I love thinking about it like this week as I was like, you know, we've talked about it for people listening, like we started recording these months and months ago.
Is anyone listening?
And we were banking them, and, you know, we're caught up now. So you're listening to this, you know, hours after we recorded it almost. But it's like, you know, months and months of thinking about this. But this week I've been having a lot of fun, like realizing that like, it's not just about where they stood in culture. It's about where their audience stood in culture. Right. And like, that's really interesting to me that like their audience took so much from them. I think that makes them incredibly important filmmakers.
Also, they were so powerful as like cult filmmakers in their early career, you know, and like I think, you know, Raising Arizona was kind of a breakthrough hit, but it also, you know, resonated on like a level of like, you know, white trash representation and stuff like that. That was just like kind of like again, like kind of just ironic fun for like Gen X people that wanted to see something kind of different, and
that's why
that's sustained them for like so long.
Like American Movie, all these sort of documentaries that came out from like 1996 till 2008 or whatever it was, where it was like all these documentaries were just about characters, about like these weird, H.I. McDonough style characters. I thought that like,
yeah, I think there is a connection. I was almost thinking like, when I was thinking of like other filmmakers that were part of this very clear movement, I was thinking like, does Spinal Tap like is that part of this movement of films?
Sure.
So I think that's like Coen adjacent for sure. Should I give my final thoughts, or Chris, do you have something?
Yeah. When I was thinking about all of these things, I just think about their themes that stand out the most to me, and it's just looking at the whole body of all 18 movies that we've covered over this time. A number of them stand out. We've covered a good number of them, but I keep thinking about two of them that are tied together is death and time. So in a Coen movie, death it's permanent, it's sudden, and it's final. That's it. It's not like there's no ghosts. We don't like have any visual. I mean, except maybe Buster Scruggs like floating up to heaven. Exactly. But there's never any visual representation of the deceased after they're dead. You don't see like any pictures of them, or like they never come back, or like a Force Yoda ghost or whatever like that. They're dead. They're gone. They were there until they weren't anymore. Now a void exists where the character used to be. It's final. It usually happens in one of two ways: either murder suicide or random accident. accident. Like, no one ever dies of old age or natural causes. I don't count Donnie, really. The only thing I can consider or think about, maybe,
that's
for
sure not an accident.
And I'm thinking, and this ties in with time, and I'll say a little bit more about this a little bit later, but even the main characters, like I just mentioned earlier, are not spared from death. Central protagonists die in Blood Simple, Burn After Reading, Man Who Wasn't There, No Country for Old Men, Lady Killers, Ballad of Buster Scruggs, True Grit, and basically A Serious Man. That's literally half of the movies. Literally 50% of those movies, the main character dies. Okay, but what about no one? Is there a movie where no one dies? I only counted Hail Caesar, which technically only takes place in a day, like one full 24-hour, and it's more like in Hollywood,
not long,
not long at all. And then technically Inside Llewyn Davis, but the whole narrative is actually informed by the death of Mike, right? Exactly. Yeah. He doesn't die within the course of the film, but it informs the whole rest of the trajectory of the movie, right? So death kind of looms over this film, despite no one actually dying within the course of it. So someone's got to die, right? But I'm thinking about it more well, why is it so final? What's this idea of death that's being expressed? And I think about the way time exists in these films, and it's always in a straight line, right? No flashbacks. There's no we'll start at the end and then what happened? How do we get here? Tim Burton does this a little bit. Other directors will take a
Martin
scene
Scorsese.
Or Fincher. Scorsese, yeah. Right, totally. The events of the movie almost always occur in near real time, usually over the span of maybe a few days at most.
The only exception to that is
True Grit.
Davis. No,
Inside Llewyn Davis.
Right.
It starts at the end, and then you don't realize that it's going back.
Great point. I was going to talk about that because you don't even. It's so geniusly crafted where it doesn't feel like it, right? You don't. It's
not until halfway through that fight,
right? We're like, oh shit, because of the circularity, right? Which we also talk about. It's this full-on circle that's literally they're manifestation of this idea of a circle, right? We don't know that it's the end when we see it that way, right? And the only exception I think would be True Grit, where we actually see Maddie as an old woman, and what's her name? That's the only time we actually see something outside of this narrow window of time. So what does that mean? It kind of, the way that they do that, and this is, I think, important narratively, is it really puts us into the experience of the main characters, totally unbroken by flashbacks or these alternate storylines. We're immersed in the experience. We're always need to know what happens next, and guess what? We're gonna get it. Something bam, 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 consistently happens. We're only with these characters for such a short while, right? But it's often a really eventful and intense short while. So we share this brief snapshot from the lives of these characters, and when it ends, that circle kind of closes up, and we're often leave the main characters as we found them. And I think of Fargo as a really great example of that. It's just this short narrative, basically. We start with Marge, we end with her, and that's a really one of the, I think, the most Coen-esque movie. I don't know if we're going to talk about that at all, but I think of Fargo and I think of a Coen Brothers film for so many different reasons. But
can I just interject something really fast? I just think that's such a great point, and the fact a lot of these movies too, these people have these kind of delusions about themselves, that these realities that they have in their heads, and then the Coens put them into situations where they don't live up to that delusion right away, you know what I mean, they just set up their situation where okay, well, what if this happens, then how does your worldview, and it immediately falls apart, or you know what I mean, the contradictions immediately become apparent, or so that's a great point.
Great point. We don't get to live in their delusions either. We live objectively removed from them, even though movies that we follow one single character, we are not in that character. We see what happens to them, and we kind of can judge them based on an outsider's perspective. We're not literally in their shoes, and I think that's important.
100%.
Yeah, and I think that also ties in with the finality of death, because it moves on so quickly, right? There's really only 2 funerals that we see, even too, because given all the people that die, we only see 2 funerals: Bernie in Miller's Crossing, and Donnie, which is one of the funniest scenes in any Coen Brothers movie, right? I was also thinking too about, just as an unrelated note, he wanted to go into the ocean, and he doesn't go into the ocean at all. He just goes blowing all over the dude's face, and he's literally out of his element, even in death.
Right.
I'm oh shit!
Element of water.
You're out of your literally out of his element, right? And anyway, it's just one last sort of observation there. And
Donnie gets a little plug at the end.
Yeah,
having no part in the
so good
Big Lebowski episode.
That's such a great movie. And then the last thing I was kind of thinking, well, one of the last things is like God, and I don't want to get like too, metaphysical, whatever, but God, the idea of God kind of exists in these movies, but I'm like, is there a God in the Coen universe? And if so, like, what kind of God is it, And a lot of their movies have been described as like Old Testament, if you will, where and I think that's kind of appropriate to a degree. Old Testament usually means like invoking the notion of like this vengeful God of wrath, who like cares less for rewarding the good and just more for like punishing basically everybody, right? Not just punishing the bad, he punishes fucking everybody. Yeah. As we've seen, so
sin,
good,
look it up.
Yeah, I mean, good is not always rewarded, and evil may often escape unpunished, like No Country for Old Men. Burn After Reading, Or are they saying that, like, despite our beliefs and desires for, like, greater meaning and understanding, there actually is no God at all, that all of this is kind of random and meaningless? Faith's only like an illusion, they touch a lot on this in A Serious Man and a couple other movies that are more of the philosophical variety, but they're not nihilists, right? Despite this undercurrent kind of running throughout a lot of their work, I think some people want to call them nihilists, but I think belief in something, be it science, God, or something else, actually creates a character. They love characters who like stand for something, right? And so I think that really outlines it all. Like they like characters who stand for whatever it is that they stand for, and they don't really care what that may be in the end of the day. So, say what you will about the tenets of National Socialism, dude. At least it's an ethos, right? I think that really encapsulates a lot. Those are the ones that kind of really themes that I really love kind of grappling with, especially in other movies and, stuff like that. But they seem to keep coming back up. And then,
I think I'm really glad that you're like, asking that question of what their philosophy is, because I do think that that's like another thing that I've throughout this whole series been like, questioning too, and it is like, you're right, they aren't nihilists. I don't think that like any of us thought that of it for a minute, even though they are so, cynical or something sometimes. But I think, it's like absurdist with cynicism, but also just like the absurdity doesn't like start and end with it's all fucking chaos theory. No. It's also like an absurdity of like, what the fuck are you going to do when all of this shit is happening to you? Right. You know what I mean? Like,
right. And they've said something to the effect of like, we want you to leave a movie like, damn, this world's shitty, but like, wow, I'm so glad to be alive. You know what I mean? I'm like, wow, that's a really interesting way to put it, and I can see where they would have that perspective. There is something worth saving in the world. There's something out there that at least is worth living, even the face of all this unspeakable violence and seemingly arbitrary, acts of cruelty that may befall literally any one of us at any time, right? And then the very last thing I was thinking about was we always kind of touch on it, but racial representation. I'm not really of the opinion that a writer can't and shouldn't write for other ethnicities. I don't think that's, the case. It's a writer's duty to like do the research and try to faithfully portray a character being represented on screen. And I think it's kind of lazy to say, I'm just not familiar with the ways those people from X background carry themselves, or I'll just omit them completely for fear of misrepresentation. I think that's fucking lazy, What I think is happening, given how much they love to read and how much they clearly love to read, so many of their stuff is based on literary, like, fables or Shakespeare, which is coming up soon also. It's clear how much of readers these guys are. They love creating these unique characters. Yeah, exactly. And they love creating these unique characters based on some of these things that they've read, unique mannerisms and ways of speaking. So it's disappointing to me, to a degree, that they haven't chosen to take on like greater pains to include people of color from different backgrounds in their works. And I'm thinking, well, really, and this isn't giving them a pass, but given the source material that they've drawn on, I'm called right immediately back to Harry Melling's the things that he was speaking on, like the Gettysburg Address, Ozymandias, Shakespeare, and quote white literature, like Western white literature, and they grew up on that, and like honestly, we all did. Anyone who went to public school in the United States, there's a lot of specific fundamental texts that we draw on, and that kind of informs our worldview. And then you get out into the world and go to college, and you realize, oh, there's other stuff. And not to say they like didn't go to college or to cut them any slack, but they're not interested in certain things, right? And that makes its way into their writing. Again, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. We're all interested in the things that we're interested in, but it's more a symptom of the structures that have undergirded our own education, and the ways that those so fundamentally influence us, I think, is more of a testament to the material that they've produced, And again, that's not cutting them any slack. Like, I would love to see them, involve more Black characters, more Asian characters, more everything, But I do know that the structures, that informed their lives and all of our lives is a large part of that. And, I'd like to see that, shift if I can. And it starts with education. Yeah, Travis?
That was great to hear, Chris. Totally. And I just want to go back to the idea of them being so of their time and just say that, like, in the 80s, there were not a lot of Black movies happening. You know what I mean? Except at the lowest level of, like, independent cinema. There were more, like, Black TV shows on in, like, the 70s than there were in the 80s. Like, you know what I mean? They came up, and I don't know what it is about that generation.
With that. There was Robert Townsend, there was Spike Lee, there was...
No. There was Spike Lee as, like, besides Spike Lee and, like, literally just Eddie Murphy, the actor.
Robert Townsend was making fucking his movies.
Who's Robert Townsend? I'm totally...
Hollywood Shuffle and...
Oh, Meteor Man?
No, Hollywood Shuffle
is good. Is that not
classic,
90s?
Like,
is that not 90s?
No, that's 80s.
Late 80s. Okay.
I'm in that same zone as the Coen Brothers. It's like...
Okay, so there's a couple exceptions, clearly. But, like, compared to, like, the 70s, I think, like, it was just a very, very white time for whatever reason. And we talked about how, like, a little bit about how, like, looking back, a lot of contemporary filmmakers misunderstand, like, the racial makeup of the country, like, even based on, like, old, even if they're doing their own take on, like, classic Hollywood stuff. And I just feel like the Coen brothers are so, and again, not excusing them like you were saying, Chris, but, like, just so blinded by their own, like, cultural position. I don't know what it is, but it just seems to me that the world that they came up in is just weirdly white, and I feel like they're a part of that. And now, as the world is becoming more kind of like, wait a minute, why can't we see, like, a world that reflects reality, like, a little bit of that reality in movies? And I think, and their stuff is looking especially dated from, like, 2021. But I think in the 80s,
my biggest disappointment through this series is not just that, like, putting on 2021 goggles and watching sort of older, early 80s of their movies and stuff like that. It's more watching the, like, latter day Coen Brothers movies and being like, you guys are still just not interested in trying. Even, like I said a few episodes ago, like, as job creators, like, you're making, like, these pretty big budget movies now. You can't, like, try to elevate Black actors. Like, you can't do anything like this. Like, no. I don't know. That's been, like, the most disappointing part of this series to me.
I'm curious to see how they treat Macbeth with Denzel. I'm not sure if it's going to be Shakespearean or if it's going to be, I would imagine it's not exactly in Scotland, but I am really curious to see. And again, that's not a duo, a joint brothers.
No, but I do think that it fits into their, like, idea of, of something spinning out of somebody's control, obviously. Like, that's one of the themes that they are always sort of invested in. And that's definitely the theme of Macbeth.
If ever there was a Shakespeare for them to adapt, it would be Macbeth. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Good call.
Anyway,
Travis,
what do you think, Travis?
You want to talk?
Well, I just want to go back to something you said about time. And, when we did the No Country for Old Men episode, you were talking about, I think specifically, the ticking clock sound. And I was thinking, as soon as that episode ended, I was thinking about, like, what that was about. And, like, it just seemed like that's, like, the perfect, like, sonic kind of, like, metaphor for, like, so many different themes in their movies. Like, there's the clock that's, like, ticking towards death, like you were saying. There's the clock that's, like, ramping up the tension in these kind of long real-time sequences, like, in the film. There is the clock that represents, like, the clockwork of the mechanism of the film itself, like, the machinery of the filmmaking. Mm-hmm. And then there's the clock that is, like, the human component, which is, like, what I mean? Like, we are also clockwork. We have, like, functions, things we do, and the way we work, and what happens when there's, like, a guy who just, like, is only clockwork, or maybe there's something wrong with the clockwork. I don't know. But I don't know. I thought that was, like, really cool. And so that kind of goes into my kind of final thoughts on their films. I did write a 2,500 word essay, so sit back.
Yes.
So the Coen brothers are formalists, whose works often offer a meta-commentary on the nature of art as a pastiche, a construction made out of formal conventions and largely like genre conventions. They favor, I should say, like, I'm breaking this into like two halves. Like if we think of these as two different filmmakers that are working together, you know, you have one is like the filmmaker and one is the philosopher, right? One is like the philosophy major, one is like the film major. And I think it's what makes their work so unique is that they have such a unique aesthetic kind of style and also such a unique like worldview. And I think the way that those kind of meld together is like what makes them such unique filmmakers. So like I'm going to start it on like a filmmaking level. Their narratives are often highly ironic, even absurdist. They favor a bold soundtrack that works in conjunction with their highly contrived and even orchestrated camera techniques. Like they have like a like almost like a musical quality to the way they move their camera and the way that like everything works like to a rhythm, whether there's music actually playing or not. You know, I mentioned my favorite quote about movies is Alfred Hitchcock saying, "Some movies are slices of life. My movies are slices of cake." And I think that quote like perfectly captures like what the Coen brothers are doing. You know what I mean? They're making they're making a confection, you know, with these different layers and stuff like that. And it's not meant to represent reality, but it's meant to like say something about reality or be enjoyed. The worlds of the films they create are teeming with detail, often the forgotten details of whatever days of yore the movie takes place in. I also want to say, not only do we get the incredible detail of the world of the different episodes of Buster Scruggs, but the color plates in the book, like that detail is so cool. Just wonderful. Anyway, the obsession over the details, the sets, the costumes, etc., are second only to their obsession with language, which is seemingly inspired by literature, movies of the past, and observations on from the real world. I don't think any other filmmaker is as skilled at writing so effectively and so specifically in such a wide variety of American dialects. And I would ponder they might be the best writers, period, in such a wide variety of dialects. I'm not well read enough to have any kind of like take on who like the greatest like novelist or something who does that. But the way that the Coens can handle basically any language and write humorously in it and get these performances from their actors, it's pretty remarkable. I think it's pretty unique in all of them.
Can I just also interject for 1 second, say like the characters that they've created like in that same way of like Marge Gunderson is so specific and like opposed to like an H.I. McDonough and a the dude and like Anton Chigurh. Obviously that's a book actually, but you know what I mean? Like they've created these characters that live like so wholly in their world as people in their time and place.
Exactly.
And it works so perfectly. Like that's exactly to your point.
Exactly. The films of the Coen brothers juxtapose often three kind of different states of humanity. This is something that I feel. The anxiety-ridden modern man, paralyzed by his knowledge that the universe is unknowable. The unconcerned, like kind of master of the universe, untroubled by anxiety, secure in his certainty that he can bend reality to his whim, and the common sheeple, mere products of their time and place. They do not strive for anything beyond the cards that fate has dealt them. Of course, in reality, all three states are products of their time and place, limited by their language, limited by their cultures, limited by their contemporaries, but also transcending the time and place are their kind of human flaws and their human kind of attributes. Unable to understand themselves, unable to understand other people, and inclined to cause each other pain. Sartre said, hell is other people. The transgressions of one snowball, creating disastrous repercussions for anyone in their vicinity. Indeed, in spite of the vast differences between people, the insurmountable differences between the characters, the distances between the characters, all of humanity is linked in the suffering that they cause each other. The sort of the transgression of one becomes like the suffering of basically anybody around them.
Yeah.
Their films possess a dark fatalism about this, about human nature. And yet their outlook is one of bemused fascination. I think, like you were saying, Ian, I mean, it's really like this kind of like 80s kind of like absurdism on just like the paradoxes of life, of being alive. Rather than nihilism, the films contain a strong moral certitude. I don't think that they're utopian thinkers. I think, their point of being like there are good systems and there are bad systems, but fate and human frailty will intervene at any point to throw things kind of asunder, and there's no avoiding that. I think that their best possible world might be something like a Hollywood farce, like an old classic Hollywood farcical movie where you have a community of flawed, ridiculous people coming into conflict with kind of minimal damage, but able to, like, through their quick talking and quick thinking, come out, if not on top, at least a little bit ahead of where they started for a while until they die, basically. Utopia is impossible. The heaven with like the wings and the harpsichord is not real. The Big Rock Candy Mountain is not real, but that is the dream. And, there's always these dream sequences in Coen Brothers movies. And I think that dream of like, heaven is so important to them, that, and like the importance of like storytelling in Coen Brothers films. The fact that like, the movies are so self-consciously fictions and so self-consciously like constructs. That's the dream. That's the story we tell ourselves. And I think that is like, for the Coen Brothers, like a really important thing. You can't have your cake and eat it too, I said. But like art itself is like the most vital motif of like all their films, like the art and the artifice itself. And that's my final take.
That's a really good place for you to leave it, because I do think that, like, it's something that we hadn't really started talking about until late into their filmography, but it was present throughout, about how this trust and this like almost eager to prove the unreality of authenticity, this sort of like that they can create a diorama scene or a movie, that they can create a beautiful moment in a movie and like really quickly show you like this is bullshit, like this is just a movie, and I think that that's sort of where they like live in their best moments too.
Yeah.
We should just rate the movies.
Should we rank them?
I love them.
Final?
I think if you want, Chris, like I'll say like Marge Gunderson, maybe my favorite Coen Brothers character. I don't know. It's hard to pick one.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Oh man, yeah, I know. I don't know if I can nail down one single
maybe
character.
The dude.
I do love Marge though. I mean, she's just got such a special place in my heart. Oh man, she's great. The dude is up there, but oh man, I don't know.
I mean, we don't really need to talk. It's so late. We've been doing this for too long, but yeah. We know where they're going next. Like, they're making Macbeth next. They're separating for the first time in their career. And it's just Joel doing it. I don't know what I expect from them next, like, besides just with this movie. But, like, I would be surprised, which they have surprised before, certainly. But I'd be surprised if they don't just keep sort of making these sort of masterful, straightforward, absurdist genre movies, like, that they've been making for the last now 15 years or whatever, like, I think that like this is sort of the lane that they found themselves in. Art's in a weird place. Film is in a weird place where, they're sort of the only indie guys that are getting big budgets, I guess them and Tarantino and people like that. But like, I don't know. I don't know what to think about where they're going, but I'm sure it'll be great. I just don't think that they're going to surprise me and like have another No Country style turn in their career. We'll see though. My list. I told you I rearranged it dramatically from every other time that we've done it.
Well, luckily I haven't been paying attention, so I also won't be surprised.
Number one is Fargo. I think that that's a perfect movie. I think it's just like so fun to watch. It's the characters, all their themes are in it. It's so good. It's just so good. I love it. I think it's a masterpiece.
Absolutely.
I feel the same thing about No Country for Old Men, but on a different level. I just think in their new form of storytelling, it doesn't get better than that. It's not going to get better than that. It's just masterful. So those are number 1 and number 2. Shocking the world. Given my new thoughts about the Coen Brothers and their importance to a specific culture, I'm putting Raising Arizona at number 3.
Hell yeah.
Because I think that it's a little bit, dated, and it's a little bit like, it's not as, I don't know, it's just more fun, and it's a different kind of movie for them. But I think it's so specifically tied to what we think of as a Coen Brothers movie and what we think of as like a generation of independent cinema. Like, I think that like it really is like the comedy version of Fargo. Like, not that Fargo is not funny, but it's as important to like filmmaking as Fargo is, but just for comedy. I don't know.
And you talk about how few of their generation of artists are still like kind of working in that big budget, like successful way. Nicolas Cage still kicking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And
still
Frances
going strong.
McDormand and Holly Hunter.
Still wacky as ever.
Then I got Big Lebowski, which I think is, I wouldn't hear a word against it. I think it's a fucking great fucking movie. I love it. It's, again, funny and like, I don't know. I don't need to talk about every one of them. We've talked about them.
We have the same top 4, Ian.
Yes.
Not in the same order. Not in the same order, but.
Oh, never mind. Fuck you. Just kidding. And we aren't going to have the same top 5 because my number 5 is Inside Llewyn Davis. I think that it's, maybe it's specific to me because I just relate to his level of cynicism so much in a sad way. But I think it's such a great latter-day Coen's movie. I'll just burn through the rest of these now. Those are my top 5 Coen Brothers movies. Then I've got Miller's Crossing. Blood Simple has moved way up for me. That's now number 7.
Cool.
For the same reason as Raising Arizona moved up. I think it's like it's an important genre breaking movie. Then The Man Who Wasn't There, I think is underrated and a classic.
Hell yeah.
And coming in at number 9 is The Ballad of Buster Scruggs, which I find to be just like pure Coen Brothers diorama storytelling and beautiful. Like, I love it so much.
Yes.
Then I've got Burn After Reading, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, A Serious Man, True Grit, Barton Fink, Hudsucker Proxy, Hail Caesar, Intolerable Cruelty, and Lady Killers at the bottom of the list.
Boom.
That's my list, guys.
Skadoosh. Well, if I may, up till after No Country for Old Men, it had occupied my number 1 spot, and I always left with a caveat. It's basically tied for Fargo. Fargo's number 1. It's reclaimed the spot in the final analysis. It's my favorite. It's their best film, Fargo. It's like the most Coen film in existence. I love it. It's phenomenal. It's everything. I need say no more. I know I'm kind of preaching to the choir here. Number 2, of course. You guys are going to
peer pressure me to change my list.
Well, I just keep thinking about it. Like, Marge Gunderson will never leave my
fantastic.
Mind. She's just everything, No Country for Old Men, of course, number 2, unforgettable, just excellent, just such a great movie. I said it enough, I think. Number 3, The Big Lebowski, to no one's surprise, a movie I've seen probably more than most any other movie, period. Just a great, well-rounded movie, hilarious.
Rounded?
What's that? Branded.
I said rounded?
Oh, yeah.
Rounded.
Oh, rounded, yeah. Bulk of the series. No, rounded, yeah. Very rounded. And just great, unforgettable performances by so many people, that just, like, define, like, an entire, like, decade to me almost. Number 4, a movie I keep saying I loved and just really appreciate, Blood Simple. Their first movie.
Yes.
What an achievement. I never would have imagined I'd like and think about this movie as much as I had the first time I saw it. It just keeps coming back up. It's one of those movies that will just, hold the top spot forever probably
Classic.
on my list. I love it. They burst right onto the scene with that one. Number 5, The Man Who Wasn't There. I'm a big fan of, as you'll find with the rest of the list, when they go into the philosophical, into the existential, it gives me something to chew on. And this film, especially being the black and white, it's beautiful. It's got so much underneath the surface, and again, it touches on a number of topics that I just keep coming back to. After that, of course, what's that?
It's just so crazy that like a great musician though can also give such a cool performance in a movie.
You know, I didn't even know he was an actor.
Right, and then you turn on the movie.
Would you have said that to
right.
Tom Petty?
Would you ask
Leonardo
DiCaprio why's Christmas around the corner? Have you guys been watching that show that I've referred to like 5 times?
Yes, it's my favorite.
Oh my god.
Okay.
Jesus.
We'll talk about that later. Next
No,
season.
but then Raising Arizona. This one keeps moving up. I know I slighted it early on in our discussions, but it's moved up considerably. It's up there. It's a great one. I love it. It's hilarious.
Good.
Keep watching Nicolas Cage these days too, and I just love where the guy is like his career is just so up and down and so weird, and I just kind of appreciate some of the stuff the guy's taken on. I don't appreciate everything, but this is just a joy. What a joy of a role this movie is, and yeah, I loved that. Next, A Serious Man, actually, again touching in keeping with my sort of philosophical, like existential themes. I really loved the way they got into that one, and then I'll just kind of list off the rest. True Grit, Barton Fink, Inside Llewyn Davis, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, Hail Caesar, Miller's Crossing. Ballad of Buster Scruggs is lower on the list, I think. It might be moving up, but as of now, that's where I'm putting it. Then the bottoms, Hudsucker Proxy, Burn After Reading, Intolerable Cruelty, and The Lady Killers. That's my list. I'm sticking to it.
All right, I'm cheating again, but
You're erasing something.
I'll
Wait a
do my
minute.
best. I'll do my best. Number 1. Still Raising Arizona. I think it's the funniest movie. It's the most joyful movie, and until Ballad of Buster Scruggs, it was really the most, like, by far their most emotional movie. Like the ending. I mean, the ending is so powerful to me, and a lot of what I appreciate about the movie actually comes out of that. And seeing the Ballad of Buster Scruggs and watching them just like play with your heartstrings like so effectively, it really like justified, I think, my appreciation of Raising Arizona on that kind of level. And I really feel like they were operating on like every cylinder in a way that they kind of don't ever again. Like I said, they don't really care to kind of like get a really emotional reaction from you. It's more like a visceral reaction, right? Or like an intellectual reaction. And that's kind of what separates Raising Arizona from basically every other movie that they've done for me. And that's why it's my favorite. Number 2, I mean, another perfect movie, Fargo. And I agree with everything you guys said. No Country for Old Men is number 3. Also amazing, but not at the same level of like irony that Fargo is. So it doesn't have as strong a Coen Brothers like flavor to it, but it's so perfect. And again, it's like almost a remake of Raising Arizona. So I don't know that anyone else but the Coen Brothers could have made it. So another perfect film, A+. Those are like the 3, I mean, like masterpieces in my mind. Number 4, Big Lebowski, another classic. Number 5, The Man Who Wasn't There.
Nice.
At that point, that's been my number 5, but like now we're getting into the ones that are like great, but opinions may vary. Your mileage may vary, but number 5, Man Who Wasn't There. Number 6, Burn After Reading. Number 7, I think maybe a little higher than usual, Blood Simple. Number 8, Ballad of Buster Scruggs. I guess that's the highest for me, from me. And after that, I really just, everything else is so good, but it's impossible for me to rank. So I'm just going to just say the titles in rough order. But really, these are all the rest of their wonderful, wonderful movies. And you couldn't hold me to favor anyone that much more than the rest. True Grit, Miller's Crossing, Barton Fink, Hudsucker Proxy, A Serious Man, Inside Llewyn Davis. I mean, I literally like will put one on top of the list and then I'll move it to the bottom, like, because there's such a crazy variety of movies and an insane amount of skill on display in so many different areas of the motion picture arts. Some are stronger in terms of the themes and some are stronger in terms of like the aesthetics. So it's like so impossible for me to like compare them against each other. But all of them are incredible to behold, even though I don't have like as strong a connection to really any of those. But those are all great. The bottom 4 are not great. We have coming in at 15, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? Again, just kind of like a dead fish for me. Like impressive in its heyday, but nothing I want to watch anytime soon. 16, Hail Caesar. Weirdly,
ineffective, weirdly like aesthetically bad. But I also want to say about that, I think my final thought on that is just that I think they were trying to look at a period of time, which was Hollywood in the 50s, deal with everything going on there outside of Hollywood, or like in the real world, right, with like communism and like the weird like kind of depravity and stuff like that that's happening off screen, but deal with it in a way where it becomes part of the Hollywood fantasy. So in that way, I think it is like Mulholland Drive, and it is like what you were saying, Ian, like kind of wrapping things up in a nice little bow, kind of like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I mean, the title could have been Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Yeah.
So
Right.
it basically is that thing too. So final thought on that, but 17, Intolerable Cruelty, 18, Lady Killers. Those are the only two ones that like I kind of wish didn't exist, but
Right.
yeah.
You guys, we did it.
What an amazing filmography. Yeah, we did it, but
seriously.
it was a joy.
It
Man.
really was. I mean, it was so much fun. And also spending the pandemic with you guys. What a treat. Thank you for this.
Absolutely.
Thanks for inviting us, Ian. Yeah.
It's been one of my favorite times each week, man. So thank you all. Thank you all for your hard work and everything that you've done to make this reality, guys. It's real.
And if anybody is insane enough to be listening 2+ hours in or however long we are, then
we lost everybody.
We will be back. We won't be back next week, but we will be back with somebody, some other director. Stay tuned to our Auteur Detour Instagram page or the Facebook page if you're on Facebook, and we'll announce it there in plenty of time once we figure out who we're doing, so that if you're interested, you can watch a bunch of their movies and follow along.
Yeah, and it's not too late to make suggestions because we do not know who to choose next.
It's a tough thing to want to watch 18 of somebody's movies.
No, we're leaning heavily towards first-time directors. We're leaning heavily towards short filmmakers.
But it's also I love this as a project because it is fascinating to watch a filmography play out in real time, or not in real time, but in chronological
order.
time.
Yeah.
And see how much filmmaking has changed over that time period too. I think that's another thing I really got out of this is just in terms of the digitalization of everything and the all of that kind of stuff is really interesting to me too, to watch it happen over 35 years.
That's true. I mean, few other filmmakers would have such a consistent filmography across that insane amount of time. So,
Absolutely.
Yeah, this was a good one to start with.
Yeah,
It's been so fun, you guys. And for anyone still listening, thank you. We appreciate you.
Yeah.
Thanks to the fans. I mean, if it wasn't for the mail I get, the photos, the kind of inappropriate but fun photos that I get sent to me PM'd on Instagram.
The Venmos.
The Venmos. The GoFundMe.
All right.
It's all
Let's get the fuck out of
appreciated.
here. Okay. You've been listening to Auteur Detour. Goodbye.
Auteur Detour. We'll see you again next year.
Thanks,
Next
everybody.
week.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Auteur Detour. We'll see you again